Morning Internet, and thanks for watching another fabulous adventure by the Urban Hiker. I'm standing in a place in Carbondale, Pennsylvania that on the night of November 9th, 1974 was probably the most famous place on Earth, at least for a few days. As the story goes, on that night, 3 teenage boys reported that they saw a UFO crash into this pond that is just south of town. If you follow this kind of stuff like I did back in 1974, this was a big story. Almost as big as the Roswell incident in, I think it was in New Mexico, where supposedly the US government recovered not just a spaceship, but also bodies of aliens that crashed in Roswell. Also, in times near the 1974 date, there was a so-called crash of another object in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. So this probably not following exactly on the heels of the Kecksburg incident, at least reminded enough people of Kecksburg that this became another part of the UFO lore in the United States. The 3 boys who reported the incident said that they saw an object, a flaming object, flying over Salem Mountain and crashing into this silt pond. This is nothing more than a pond that's been used by a local coal mining company in 1974 to sort of clean coal that they've strip mined from the area. It's not very deep. The water's fairly dirty, and in some cases it's polluted. And back in those days, any object crashing into this would have caused a lot of land disruption and probably a big noise. We're not too far from the town of Carbondale. The boys reported this to the police. The police came up, searched the area, and found a glow under the water in the pond. The pond is about 7 to 10 feet deep, or at least it was at the time. The water reportedly was clear, but as soon as you start looking for something in a silt pond, you're going to stir up the silt that's on the bottom of it and cause the water to become cloudy. But both parties, the boys and the police, did report that they spotted a glow coming to the surface from inside the water. As word spread through town as to what was going on, crowds began to gather. The police cordoned off the area and tried to keep people out, but that plan didn't really work very well. Later on, reports say that the military showed up, and people from NASA may also have been in attendance. Divers were sent down, shots were fired, and eventually a lit railroad lantern, the old style railroad lantern, was pulled out of the pond, and that was the end of the story. After the police cordoned off the area and removed most of the people that were sort of just hanging around seeing what was going on, there is also a report that a flatbed truck came in, a military flatbed truck, came in the darkness and loaded something from the pond onto the back of the truck, covered it with a tarp, and drove it away. Once the truck was gone, the police removed the cordon around the area, and that's when the divers were brought in to recover whatever it was supposedly either in the pond or supposedly left in the pond. During the investigation phase, the police had some kind of a boat or perhaps a raft that they put in the pond and went out to investigate the light. This light was supposedly about 20 to 30 feet from shore, and they could see it underneath the water. While they were investigating, the light supposedly moved towards the boat or towards the police or whoever else was in the boat investigating the glow, and that's when shots were fired. In the report by Matt Graeber, which is linked to the bottom of this video, up to 6 shots were fired at the light in the pond. Let's say that when a still lit old-style railroad lantern was pulled from the pond, there was a lot of guffawing and disgust expressed by those who were conducting the search and those who were standing around the pond watching it. Is it possible that the railroad lantern was the subject or the source of the glow that everyone saw in the pond? There's still a lot of argument about that among people who want to think that it actually was something that fell from space. So what did people think was going to be found in the pond? Well, speculation ranged from an alien spacecraft, of course, which is part of the reason why people interested in UFOs are so interested in this particular incident. It was also possible that it could have been a satellite that crashed to Earth from the United States or the Soviet Union. This was during 1974, which of course is the height of the Cold War. And then it could have also been a Soviet missile fired for who knows what reason, but somehow ended up in the pond south of Carbondale, Pennsylvania. I have to admit that up until I started investigating this incident for this video, that I had hoped that it would have been something that did fall from space. But then I found a report online that sort of took a look at everything in a logical manner, and a report that was written by someone who was actually here during the entire incident, or most of the incident. I suggest that you read that. It's an article by Matt Graeber, and it's linked at the bottom of this video. It's a very long article, but it's also very interesting if you're interested in the exact step-by-step, or TikTok as we call it, of what happened that night. So, from my understanding, what was found in the pond? A railroad lantern that was still lit. And you ask, was this the source of the glow in the water? Yes, it was. Did anything fall from space that night into a pond outside Carbondale, Pennsylvania? The answer to that is no, nothing did. If you just think about it, anything falling from space is falling at a ridiculously fast speed. And if it fell into a small body of water, that is basically a silt pond, even if it didn't knock all the water out of the pond at the time, it would have stirred up the silt on the bottom enough to the water would not ever have been reported as clear when they started the search. Also, there were no military here. There were members of the Civil Air Patrol, which is a sort of like a military version of the Boy Scouts, and maybe they were wearing uniforms that might have been suspected of being military, but there were no military units, and there was no one from NASA here. There wasn't anything taken from the pond and put on the back of a flatbed truck. If there was a flatbed truck here, it was probably here to move a piece of heavy equipment, as Mr. Graeber points out in his article. It's not unusual to have industrial sites move heavy equipment during the weekend because there's less traffic then. And this used to be an industrial site of a coal mining company. So the idea that somebody loaded something from the pond on the truck, covered it, and took it away in secret is not true. Okay, so let's talk about the boys' story for a minute. They reported that they saw something flying over Carbondale from Salem Mountainside, which is on the east side, and crashing or landing in the silt pond behind Russell Park. That's what they said. Now, did they see something fly over? Maybe. What would it have been? It could have been a meteor, which of course would not have crashed into the ground. It could have been a meteorite, which if it did crash into the ground would have made one heck of a racket and probably disrupted the water and the earth around the pond for quite a distance. So if a meteorite crashed into that pond on the night of November 9, 1974, this would not be a matter of controversy at all. Everyone would know exactly what occurred. Could it have been an alien spaceship landing in the pond? Probably not. I'm trying to put myself in the position of aliens flying towards Earth, looking for an underwater place to land. And if I were doing that, I would probably pick something that was a little easier to see than a small silt pond in Carbondale, Pennsylvania. Something like, the Atlantic Ocean, for example. That's a little bit easier to spot from outer space. Also, I should note that in the full description of what took place, the boys did confess that they made up the entire story. So, was this a meteor or meteorite that prompted the whole thing? Maybe. But the whole idea now is that the boys made the story up. They at first threw a flashlight into the pond, and it didn't stay lit for very long. And then they threw in the radio lantern, which managed somehow to stay lit for several hours until it was recovered. Where they think came up with a railroad lantern, I have no idea. So here's the bottom line on the Carbondale UFO. It was a hoax from start to finish. And no matter what anybody tells you, there's not one bit of truth to the idea that a space junk or a satellite crashed into the pond, or that aliens from outer space crashed into the pond. Someone threw a lantern into a pond and claims that it fell from the sky. It didn't. It didn't happen, and anybody that keeps saying it does isn't playing with a full deck. As to the whole story being some kind of a conspiracy to hide the fact that aliens did land in Carbondale in 1974, ask yourself this question. Can you know something and never tell anyone else? Think about that. And when you come up with the correct answer, you'll realize that a conspiracy on something like this is impossible. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.